Hey everybody, this is Dr. Kevin McGovern, and it is another episode of the Prove It Live podcast. Mike, so many I forgot what number it is, but there's a
Like
lot.
110 maybe? One no, I
Uh,
think we're above that.
no, you're wrong. It is episode number 114. We have another
Wow.
special guest with us today, Brett Rosin, the pitching coach for Montreat College in Montreat, North Carolina. But before we talk to him, I'm going to introduce you to my very handsome co-host, Mr. Mike Frary. Mike,
Thank you,
take us
Kevin.
away.
Wonderful introduction once again. I commend you highly for it. I am Mike Ferry from the Farm Baseball Performance Institute, alongside the aforementioned Kevin McGovern. Excited about today's show. So we had a little string of interviews here and guests. So I'm always excited for the guests, mostly because Kevin does most of the interview and I get to sit back and just kind of chill. So,
Well, it's because I have the higher IQ.
oh, clearly,
Yeah,
clearly,
obviously,
but at least
right?
by a half a point. Yeah.
Somebody's got to.
Someone's got to have. So yeah, so our today's guest is a Twitter friend of mine. As you know, Mike, sometimes I like to just for the fun of it get into Twitter wars, mostly with people who have
Not really.
zero IQ, and those are always fun. And I think after one of my Twitter exchanges, Coach Brett Rosen contacted me back in the summer, and we struck up a conversation about pitching mechanics and health, and he seemed to be on the same page as I was, and invited me to come down to the school, which is like epically beautiful. I know I mentioned that
Yeah. Tell me more about it.
we had head coach Beck on the other day. It looks to me, the only way I can describe it is like a Civil War fort. Like all of the architecture is the same, right? And it's got, like I've been to Notre Dame, right? So all of Notre Dame's architecture is the same. So the same thing for here, but the architecture is like nothing I've ever seen before. And it's literally in the middle of the woods in this neighborhood, like water and the field is built in, it's a plateau into a mountain. It's amazing.
Must have been
It's
so nice to see in person.
It's amazing.
it's pretty unique.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the
So
most unique places in the country. I mean,
so
it's
coach,
gorgeous.
welcome. And thanks for coming on the show. So
No, thanks for having me. Thanks for
yeah.
having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and where you're from and how you got to the school and what you're up to.
Sure. Gosh, it's I've got a pretty unique and interesting path in this game. When I was 17, I was a junior in high school. I was 92 to 94 out of high school outside of Chicago. Unfortunately, I blew up my elbow like so many other guys and needed Tommy John surgery. Had that done in 2004 by Dr. Andrews down in Alabama. Ended up missing my senior year. I lost 30 to 35 different D1 scholarship opportunities. I wasn't drafted due to those reasons. Ended up signing a 99% scholarship at Lindenwood University. Back then, it was a power NAIA program. Now it's a small D1. Missed my senior year, went there in the fall, still had a lot of problems with my elbow in the fall, needed a secondary surgery, ended up being like a debridement. I had bone spurs, chips, scar tissue. It was just kind of a total disaster. After that, I ended up, having surgery with Dr. Kremchek in Cincinnati.
Oh,
Well, I rehabbed that for, let's call it 6 to 7 months and ended up walking on to Elgin Community College, also outside of Chicago. Big time JUCO. I think they were in the World Series 4 or 5 years, either in a row or, over a couple, let's call it maybe a decade or so. But very, very good program. Coach Angelo is actually still there and still running, a heck of a school there. But I probably hurt my shoulder in that fall, and I ultimately went about 16, 17 months without a clear diagnosis of what was going on. It was let's call it a pretty vicious cycle of injury, doctor's appointment, MRI, rehab, throwing program, get to, let's call it 100 to 120 feet. Still had the same problems. And then that cycle would ultimately reset itself. And I saw everybody. I saw Dr. Nicholson in Chicago. I saw Dr. Kremchek for it. The only one I wasn't able to see actually was Dr. Andrews because he was no longer in my health insurance, in my network. So I couldn't go see him. But I went through that process for about 15, 16 months without any sort of idea of what the heck was going on. So pretty frustrating time, but ultimately At the very end of that cycle, I was just kind of like, look, I can't do it anymore. I can't throw. The pain just, it was ultimately I decided to walk away at that point for about 6 weeks. My dad randomly called me and said, "Hey, Dr. Andrews was just put back on our health insurance. You want to go see it?" Okay, sure. I wanted to play. I just couldn't do it. I just physically couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I went down there and he found a labrum tear in about 15 minutes from not only an old MRI, but through, the exam that he put me through, and had a new MRI, and ultimately, cleaned up a slap tear, and three, I believe it was three tacks, maybe it was four. It's been
Wow.
it's probably about 15 years now, but yeah, at that point I decided to move down to Gulf Breeze, Florida, where I was rehabbing, not only at the Andrews Institute, but I was also training at, back then it was called Athletes Performance, now it's called Exos. And I was there for about 16 months. And the cool thing about Exos at that point, they had the early versions of the biomechanics labs, and ultimately was able to learn a lot about biomechanics, and ultimately the true reasons why elbows and shoulders have been breaking across the board. And I was able to see guys that were habitually injured have the same fatal flaws in their delivery, and I was one of those guys. I had the same flaws that they all did, and this is back in 2007, 2008. But ultimately, pitch one final season and kind of finish my career on some sort of positive note, which I was able to do. I walked on at Kishwaukee College, which is outside of DeKalb, Illinois. Pitched one final season. I don't know. I was 80 to 83, maybe touched an 84 at that point. But my career is coming to an end. I was 22 years old. But during that season, I actually started a little baseball blog where I was predicting pitcher injuries at the big league level with my co-founder of the blog, somebody that I had grown up with and went to school with for maybe 12 to 15 years. And that little blog turned into actually one of the bigger digital media companies in the world at that time. We expanded content strategies. We launched MLB blogs, NFL blogs, NBA blogs, a big sports blogging network called Rant Sports. We ended up raising, over the course of, let's call it, about 9 years, 12 million in funding for it. 70 employees, 3 different offices, 2 Fortune 500 CEOs on my board. We were on Inc. 5000 3 years in a row. We peaked at number 18 total, first in digital media for total growth. You're on Forbes top 100 fastest growing companies here in the U.S. So it was a really awesome experience. But ultimately this is why they're blowing up. So it's kind of interesting. But ultimately I sold that back in 2016 to a public company. Wanted to come back to the game in some way, shape, or form. Ended up getting the pitching coach job and recruiting coordinator job down at Ave Maria in Naples. I was there right before 2020 happened. Ultimately left, went back into the private space of M&A and corporate development, and got involved in a pharmaceuticals deal. We were doing a $60 million financing when Coach Beck called, and ultimately they were looking for somebody to come in and start ultimately rebuilding the staff that they had. And this will be my 3rd season here doing that. So it's been kind of a whirlwind, but ultimately it's been quite the experience across the board. So
that is quite the experience.
Yeah.
So how
Yeah.
does that call go? Hi, Brett. Do you want a 97% pay cut to come and teach kids about this? Sure. Yes, I love one.
Yeah. It's
So,
it's just something that I've always been very passionate about, and trying to be a part of kids' lives, and not just the baseball side of things, but ultimately serving some sort of purpose for their life. And, it's just something that, I've always believed, was a big part of my life. And ultimately it's also about giving back. A lot of people helped me get to where I am, today. So it's, something that, I can pay it forward a little bit.
That's awesome. Now you had mentioned in, when you're down an athlete's performance exos that you had identified your flaw, what you thought. So what is that flaw that you think caused your injury?
I was an early scap load,
Now,
leaking backside energy, foot
so
drag, flat
so
arm syndrome. I mean, it's the same. It's
so
the same.
explain the I always like the term scap load. Explain the scap load to me.
You're just pulling the scaps back really, really early. Elbow pickup. The arm has to go through a flat flip up, type of action, that puts ultimately all the load directly on the elbow, and then ultimately on the shoulder.
It's the Mark Pryor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is
I
so
wasn't as bad. I wasn't as bad as Pryor, but
Okay.
I mean, I did have some elbow lift, and I was definitely into the early scap position. The front side's turning early, and I'm leaking energy through the backside, trying to generate, arm speed, specifically and only with the arm. And it's the same, fatal flaw that so many guys have at all levels now.
Oh yeah.
Not just MLB plyos 75 feet, pivot picks, and just doing all sorts of things that they're seeing and led to believe is going to be to their success. However, I don't think they're getting the right story regarding the data of what that ultimately will do to their elbow at some point. And I think that's why we're seeing elbow surgery and shoulder surgery skyrocket. From 11, 12 all the way into the pro game. I think MLB just ran some sort of graphic, maybe last week in one of the series, that 36% of all MLB pitchers have had Tommy John surgery now, and that is only going to go up because of what is happening at the lower levels. So it's kind of a shame. I mean, we're rehabbing, a couple, Tommy John guys that ended up blowing it out last year, at their JUCOs. So
that percentage is going to go up too. Because they're not including multiple surgeries. It's tons of guys out there with multiple surgeries, and it's not just all ages anymore. It's all positions as well. You're seeing
right.
that, position players.
Jason Dominguez just loaded put out, so
Yep.
it's
Thanks for telling me that. But your scap load, whatever they want to call, there's many different terms for essentially what Mike and I have agreed on is arm drag or throwing uphill, right? If your arm is still against gravity and you still have the ball in your hand, you're in trouble, as opposed to throwing downhill. But there are people who teach exactly how you got injured, right? There are lots of people who still teach that. The aforementioned pitching coach of Mark Pryor, we don't have to mention his name, but he still teaches those mechanics that injured Mark Pryor. The foot drag, the arm, very late arm action, no body action. Like how, as a pitching coach, you must get, if you've got 20 pitchers on your team, you must have 20 different pitching coaches. How do you sort everything out? Well, how do you get guys on a path to stay healthy? Because we talked with Coach Beck yesterday. It's not like, you have an unlimited supply. You blow 3 or 4 pitchers out, it's going to affect your entire season.
Yeah. It's a challenge. Ultimately at our level, we ultimately get a lot of guys that have been hurt before. They've done the drive lines, they've done the super aggressive velo builder programs, and the really aggressive plyo programs, and ultimately most guys have had some sort of problem before. So it's a little easier to walk them through all the data, all the data that they don't see from all of these programs that they've been taught or bought into with their own money. And then we walk through, mechanics of guys that have blown out, and then we do comparative analysis with that, to the point of, hey, either try and make the adjustment, try and make the change, or we've got to do something to alleviate excess pressure the best, the best ways we can. And ultimately, some guys are really athletic where we can make changes. Some guys ultimately are not as athletic, and they can't even make the changes if they want to. So we do, what we can in terms of trying to stack the backside long, try and get the arm a little bit more on time and delay, front side rotation. And those are the guys that typically stay more healthy. I'm a big believer in, Alan Jaeger and a lot of the Jaeger principles around how often they should be throwing, and the type of programming, ultimately to train the body and the arm to handle a specific workload, as we get into the season. So every case is different. Every kid is different. We have honest dialogue about what they've done in the past, how I do it here. And hopefully it syncs up. And most of the time it does. There are always a couple cases where it doesn't, and I'm here to support them in the way that they need. And ultimately, as a college athlete, they deserve a say and a right into how they want to be trained, as long as they have, the right, risk analysis to make the decisions. I'll support anything they really want to do. But it's of my opinion that there are a lot of programs out there and a lot of that I'm now watching, 12-year-olds, they're just not getting the proper information, to make good decisions for the specific athlete. Because I don't think it's a plyo program. It's really more about plyo programs with bad actions. And when you start, adding one on top of the other, that's kind of where we're starting to see that elbow bomb blow. And I think that's the a big problem in today's game.
I'm a little surprised that you're getting the reception that you're talking about, because you're right. These guys are going and spending a lot of money. They see the list of some guys that went to these programs before, and it's a saying, and it's true, that it's a lot easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them that they've been fooled. And so a lot of times people just dig their heels in. They know the right way. So it's good to hear that you're getting a decent reception in terms of like changing how they're approaching things. That's
ultimately, guys don't want to be hurt all the time. And I think they get tired of being hurt all the time. And frankly, throwing shouldn't create, the type of pain that some of these kids, have gone through in the past, including myself.
Yeah.
And it's tough, and I wouldn't wish it, on anybody. We brought in a kid from a JUCO who ultimately blew it out last March at his JUCO, and we still brought him in, and now we're at 160 feet, and he's had to totally relearn how to throw. And I caution guys that simply say, well, I can just have for a full year straight, and then tell me if you want to go through that. It's just not as simple as it sounds. And ultimately, the average mile an hour is gained on Tommy John surgery is actually, a mile an hour lost, where pro guys, they carry that percentage because that's their full-time job.
Right.
Where at college and high school and below, you don't get to rehab for 7-8 hours a day, and you're not paid, handsomely to do so. And
Right.
it's just I think it's a bad spiral. It's a bad spiral right now. And, hopefully that, more information gets out there, and, kids ultimately start understanding that, velocity could be gained in a lot of different ways without putting the elbow in such a compromising position.
So I have a question that Mike and I have been trying to figure out for years. It's the celebrity, I'm going to name it, Mike, the celebrity phenomenon. So we've mentioned Mark Pryor. We've mentioned Driveline. We mentioned the New York Yankees. We can talk about the Cincinnati Reds. All programs and people that have had celebrity people in charge of their wellness pitching and have had disastrous, not poor results, disastrous results. I mean, the Yankees limped in to the end of the year with one starting pitcher left. Their top outfield prospect out all next year. And yet the followings of these people have gone up exponentially with poor results. Right. And then someone who, not just me, but there's other people in my space that are getting results, scientists, and that we're ostracized by, like, no, we're healing people. How do you explain? And there's I came down to your program. There are people, either we can show them, and they were still like, no. I mean, the one kid he told me about, no, it's thrown one pitch in 2 years. Like, I don't understand that. Maybe you can help us.
I mean, I think it's as simple as mass marketing. It's a powerful tool in selling kids on a dream that ultimately, I think is a false bag of goods.
Yeah, even though the results do not at all show up. They
Yeah,
don't.
but I think that they often find ways to skirt that. They put it on something else. Well, it wasn't our program. You're not doing X. You're not doing, or you were doing this in addition, and that's what caused it. I mean, there's a lot of that too.
Well,
Yeah,
ultimately, look, I can take 100 of anything. I can take 100 of anything, and there's going to be a percentage of failure, a percentage of success.
of
Of
course.
course, I'm going to only tout the success, not the failed percentage.
Right.
Right. And within that sample size, if it's 100 and my success is 80%, okay, I'm going to tout the 80 guys. I'm not going to tout the 20 guys and whatever I was trying to do or accomplish with the total 100, right? And then you get into the mass marketing and the power of social media, and in today's world where you've got to have it right now.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think honestly, it's that easy. All kids and all athletes, they want to be the very best that they can. And ultimately, if somebody says, hey, if you do this, you're going to make $1 million, you're going to be a first round draft pick. How many kids and how many, parents are going to fall into that
Yeah.
trap? And I
I
think
mean,
that's what we've seen. So
I've had arguments with my own brotherhood of and sisterhood of PTs about, like Chris Sale, like, oh, well, you made 80 million. I'm like, well, would you actually teach those mechanics? Like, would you teach that? And people would say, well, he made 80 million. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my God. So like it's just
And it's probably a
infested.
hundredfold of people that never had the chance
Yeah,
to make.
it's infested everywhere. So Brett, there are a lot of
I think Kevin, part of the problem with talking about the Chris Sales and the guys that make that type of money, those are the anomalies.
Right.
yeah,
Not everybody is the anomaly, or nobody would be the anomaly.
right.
And I think there are too many kids that just believe that they are the anomaly, when ultimately basic statistics says otherwise. And I think that's
Pros.
It's
are doing the homework on what is the best way to move their career forward. And I think there's just not enough honest conversation about this. It's very polarizing. And I know it's polarizing for my front. I've had my fair share of conversations with, major D1 pitching coaches, pro guys, guys that come from driveline, they come from tread, and it seems odd that we can't have an honest conversation about trying to find the why to the problem.
mm,
I would find it problematic if somebody doesn't think there is a problem. And
Well,
a lot of a lot of
especially
people
when it's
don't.
on, yeah. And the discouraging part is that I agree with everything you're saying, but now it's on full display. It is on full display with the Yankees. It was on full display with the Reds. We know the people that were called upon to come in and fix problems, and it's gotten a lot worse. So it is. I'm not saying discouraging, but it sort of shows you that as a baseball community, sort of the battle we're up against when it is on full display. It's in your face, and still people that try to oppose it or even raise the alarm that, hey, there's a serious issue here, are if not ostracized, they're bullied upon, they're ganged up on. It's really sad.
For me, I don't know. Maybe I'm somebody that believes in idealists. Like, the community should be getting together to figure out the why, instead of, oh, it's my program versus your program, right? Because every athlete also is different, and I think when you train certain guys the same way with the same flaws without telling them the type of risks they're going to go through, I think that's where the mistakes are made. But it's a little disappointing that folks can't have an honest conversation to figure out the problem, right? Because there are careers at stake. There's a lot of money at stake, and frankly, I don't necessarily understand some of the things that happen, at the MLB front office. Because if I have a budget, I don't think I'm going to be spending 30% of my budget, 40% of my budget, 50% of my budget on almost certainties that I'm not going to get the value for the dollar that I'm spending.
Right.
And I don't necessarily understand that from an economic standpoint, but also I don't own a team, so it's it's just an outsider's opinion at that point. So
All right, so I got one more question before we let you go. We've got many parents who listen to the show who are looking for their child little Johnny to play in college. What should they be looking for a development program? What are the do's and don'ts? And what are you looking for as a pitching coach to get someone into college?
all right, sorry, Kevin, you froze on me at that
Oh,
very end. Yeah, can
sorry.
you go through that one more time?
Yeah. So what do you, as you know, we got a lot of people who are looking to get into college, parents trying to get their kid into college. What are you looking for? What should they be doing? What kind of program? Like, what are you looking at to get to literally recruit a pitcher?
Sure. I mean, I would really focus at the younger ages on clean movement patterns. Being able to squat correctly, being able to, stack the backside correctly, being able to get the arm in proper, let's call it proper alignment and synced up to that backside where, we're not picking up with the elbow, we're not creating, severe timing problems at 10, 11, 12 years old, and just really focusing on in my opinion, the way the body is supposed to move. And I know that you share that opinion with everything that you're doing. But, from a recruiting standpoint, when you start getting 15, 16, 17, I'm a big believer of being able to command the baseball and being able to move efficiently creates command. Guys that just sit there and try and throw it through the catcher, they're going to walk 4 in their outing and then try and tout, hey, well, I hit 92. And it's like, okay, great. But you're not going to pitch here, if you're 92 without command. One of our hardest throwers last year didn't pitch that much for those problems. And I have no problem turning it over to an 80 to 84 guy, that ultimately can command and sink it and cut it. And, right. It's never going to go away. It's something that, the more you have, the better off you are for it. But ultimately, if you can't command with it, it's totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So give yourself time to develop, get bigger, get stronger, move more efficiently, and don't look for the tricks of the trade. Learn the trade. And I think there's too many kids out there that they're looking to cheat their way to velocity. And I mean, be cheating. I just mean, ultimately going through, some of the aggressive, plyo programs to pick up velocity as fast as they can. And then ultimately they break down. And, ultimately programs like ours were collateral damage to that. And we bring guys in that, were 90, 91 or touching 92 or whatever it is. And then they get here and they're 84, 85 and they're broken. So
move more efficiently. You hear that, people? We've maybe said that once or twice. Move more efficiently. Well, Brett, thank you. I know you got to run. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll definitely have you on again. We appreciate your time and attention, and hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Obviously, we will be in touch, and enjoy the rest of the show, and have a wonderful day up there in the Northeast.
Yeah, you enjoy Asheville.
Yeah, I will.
Right.
So, thanks,
Thank you, my friend.
All right, guys.
Have a good one.
You too.
So there you go. Move efficiently, arm drag.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the other thing
it just wasn't scripted. This wasn't WWE, right? This was right from, you heard the last, both coaches, Mike, from the same school, dealing with a bunch of injuries, telling you the exact same thing that we go over every week in this podcast.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too, his comment of, don't learn the tricks of the trade, learn the trade, because that's something we talk about too, is, we've gone away from learning the craft of pitching. There are guys that are throwing in the mid 80s to upper 80s, even lower, that get outs. And at the end of the day, your job as a pitcher is to get outs. Excuse me, just had a burp. We talked about this before, but when you ask a kid, I've asked like, 12-year-old kid, hey, what's your idea of a perfect game? And so they tell you what a perfect game is: no walks, no errors, whatever. So no, like the perfect game. And they'll say 27 up, 27 down, 27 strikeouts. And it's like, no, it's 27 up, 27 down, and 27 pitches. That's the idea of a perfect game, right?
Exactly.
Get the outs, get a pop-up, get a grounder. It's why you have a defense. It's why there's so many guys on the field. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many times that we're preaching that, you have to perfect your basic movement before you perfect your athletic movement. And there are really specific steps in doing that. And we hear lots of, we had a place the other day, you know, they're being sent somewhere else for strength and conditioning when they have all the tools right there in their facility, but they're being sent somewhere else because someone thinks it's, conditioning of young adolescents has something to do with weight equipment, and it has
Right.
nothing to do with that. You're dealing with, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids who are going through all kinds of puberty changes, and you need to get them to do body weight and refine their movement and do a bunch of reps of that. And that's all you have to do.
Right.
Balance, movement, you have enough with body weight. Machines are only going to make them get worse.
Well, that's the thing, especially because if they learn those proper movements at a young age, then by the time they start using weights, they're way more likely to be using proper mechanics when they do it, and they'll benefit from it. And it's the opposite. It's like, they don't let young kids do anything. And then all of a sudden it's in the weight room on the squat rack, and with oftentimes minimal supervision, as you've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a big part of the idea of, I mean, we have to say it, right? I mean, strength training is a big part of this, the poor strength training that's gone, because I don't think it's a coincidence that this also really became an exponential problem when strength training and weightlifting, I should say, more than anything, became such a prevalent thing in baseball training.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, if you want to contact please like us on YouTube and Facebook, subscribe, email the show at info@proveitlive.com, and we'll see you next time. We got more guests coming up.
Adios.
Oh, my thing is frozen. Stop.